Welcome to the webinar. You have entered as an organizer and may now speak to any other organizers or panelists on the line. When you are ready to begin the presentation, press the Start Broadcast button on the GoToWebinar control panel to allow all attendees to hear you. This system will notify you once you begin your broadcast.
Just checking there, I got kicked out. Everyone can hear me? Okay, I don't know what happened there.
Yes.
That could be another also, if all phones on silent would be good.
Yeah.
Yes.
Manjeet.
So I'm just checking on the live feed.
I am from Delhi. Dr. Hegde is from Bangalore. Can the other panelists share their locations? Good morning.
Codee from Sydney, Australia.
Sydney. What about Lee?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lee from Sydney.
Okay. Mr. Opperman.
Yes, good afternoon. Ian Opperman from Sydney.
Okay, good afternoon. Yeah, of course. So we have 3 locations in India and most of you in the Sydney. It's a majority Sydney takes over. Pleasure to meet you guys right after this webinar.
Okay, so we're going to get going. My computer is telling me it's not liking what we're doing, but that's okay. It's looking a bit
We are
odd.
late by 2 minutes.
So look, we'll give it a crack on the live feed. Looks like there's some issues on the live feed, but we'll give it a go. At least on GoToWebinar, it will be fine. So just one moment. Sorry about this. Okay. Now we're cooking with gas. Now we can start.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, everything looks fine. Hello, welcome to the virtual educational series, Indo-Pacific series with My Security Marketplace and My Security Media. My name is Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor and Director for My Security Media. And this is covering off on aerospace, defence and security technology, market trends, opportunities between India, Australia and the ASEAN region. This is episode 1 following an 8-series episode covering off on India's Reach series. So hopefully you're we are welcoming you back. Otherwise, this is your first visit to us. And this particular series, we will be looking at a range of domains. If you remember back to the India's Reach series, we had a long list with Raman Supuri, my co-host there in Delhi. And then this time we are just focusing on 4 key areas: aerospace and space, defence and national security, cybersecurity and critical technology, and cities and infrastructure. And once again, our series is brought to you in partnership with the Aerospace and Defence Consultants Association of India, and Raman there in Delhi. Raman, thank you very much for joining us. Technically episode 9, but episode 1 on a new series with us. Without further ado, we're going to cover off on the panel that is joining us today. And we're in, I think, 4 or 5 cities at least. We have Dr. Ian Opperman, the New South Wales Government's Chief Data Scientist, and V. Lee, the Stakeholder Engagement Manager for Standards Australia here in Sydney. V and Ian, thank you very much for joining us here in Sydney. Good on you. Codee Ludbey is also in Sydney, and I've known Codee since he was a third-year student. I keep reminding him of that. It just makes me feel old, that's all. But Codee's going to be talking about city protection, public safety, and he's the principal consultant at TACTIX. And then we have in Delhi and in Bangalore, Chinmay, or Dr. Chinmay Hegde and Sangeeta Garg. Thank you very much for joining us there, Delhi and in Bangalore. ASTRIKOS Consulting, and we're going to hear about some software development for smart cities as well. So we talked about those 4 domains. We're starting off with the cities and infrastructure domain, and hopefully we work our way up into space in terms of what we're going to do. So without further ado, I'm just going to cover off on our week-to-week news. First, we're going to hear from Ian and V, then we'll hear from Chinmay and Sangeeta, and then we'll hear from Codee, and then we'll run a panel session for the audience as well. So if you've got any particular questions, you can put them in the show notes. And then also this has been recorded, and technically it should be getting streamed on YouTube, and then hence why we have some technical issues on the way. I touched on last week's episode 8, we looked at the MRO industry trends, maintenance, repair, overhaul and aerospace sector. Very interesting sector, really dived in deep into Air Force defence for India. Went for about 90 minutes. Not my specialty, but very, very interesting in terms of sort of that homegrown resource that India has, and some real challenges there, I suppose, in a $1 billion sector. So a lot of opportunities out of that as well that you can still catch up on our YouTube channel. And again, just a thank you to our guests. So we hope we've set ourselves a 10 series episode for this particular series, Indo-Pacific. We did 8 episodes with the India's Reach series, and we had about 20 guests overall. Everything from the Australian Ambassador for Cyber Affairs and Critical Technology, a couple of trade commissioners, and the like. So thank you to all of those guests, and hopefully we can keep the same quality of panels going through this series. Next week, we're going to dive into cybersecurity. Australia's just released Australia also. We hosted the New South Wales Cybersecurity Task Force recently. So we'll have a look at these national cybersecurity strategies as they roll out. And we have a couple of guests, I think from Israel and Canada, Raman from Waterfall Security, that might join us as well. Raman, I'm going to hand over to you. You provided a couple of news points. So left of field is Lieutenant General Saini giving an inaugural address, and then also Happy Independence Day for last Friday.
Good afternoon to my friends in Australia, and good morning to my friends in India, and hello world. We had our Independence Day on the 15th of August. On the right hand side you see our Prime Minister Modi speaking on the 7th time in his tenure, 2nd time. And what he's done is that he's unleashed new policies which are going to help both the industries in India and Australia and rest of the world. India has announced a new procurement policies, and to reach out, we have a export target of $25 billion by the year 2025 in aerospace defense. This also includes additional targets for infrastructure, smart city infrastructure. Yesterday, we had a very good webinar by the Indian Army showcasing different opportunities in the Army Make in India projects. On the left-hand side, you've got the Vice Chief of the Indian Army, and they have listed the projects. What we are seeing is also the opportunities in the Indian space sector. For the first time, Indian government has opened the space sector for the private sector itself. So it gives a lot of opportunity for the Australian companies. India and Australia have signed an agreement about 2 months back. And the 4 items which Mr. Chris has unleashed today morning, we see enormous opportunities between the two countries to put together. Over to Chris. We'll see rest of things later. Thank you.
Thank you. And one more, Raman, you sent through hiring activity in India. Look like it's marginally up, just 5%. So you were obviously looking for some good news and anything like that in terms of employment. So, some early signs there, and hopefully India is not going too bad. I haven't been keeping up with what India's going with COVID, and there's enough news here in Australia with Melbourne, so hopefully it's all going well. Just a couple of stories that came through on our channels. Our Sarosh Bana, our Mumbai correspondent, wrote an interesting article, This Emperor Has No Clothes, just on the abuse, really, of social media channels in India in terms of some of the youth and some of these sort of, what are they called, influencers as well, almost fraud-like behaviour using social media. Japan's also trying to make a bit of a comeback in the tech sector. Japan is the world's leader manufacturer of industrial robots and has set out in terms of, particularly in looking at battery technology, becoming a leader in that particular field. This is from Futorium. They're a US and UK based, just on the SD-WAN infrastructure survey. Potential interest there around, particularly with a COVID remote working environment as well, just looking at the SD-WAN software or services for networking operations, and there's some changes underway due to COVID and the changes in networking behaviour as well. Cloud service providing from Google Cloud is now the leading cloud provider for the retail space. And again, you would have thought, given COVID-19 in 2020, the move to online shopping, retailers moving to the online environment, they are going with Google Cloud, it would seem. Some space news. SpaceX here in Australia is launching the Kleos Space second satellite cluster in mid-21. Then we have the Amiro secures initial purchase order from, Gilmore Space Technologies for the manufacture of 2 rocket motor components. So some reasonable news coming out of Australia and the space industry. We have 4 Royal Australian Navy vessels moving into the exercise Rim of the Pacific, or RIMPAC as it's called, for 2020. And that is involving Australia, Brunei, Canada, France, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, Philippines, Singapore and the US for a major naval exercise. And it's the first time the Hobart-class guided missile destroyers are participating in RIMPAC also. So one to watch. These photos are directly from Defence today. And a couple of news from our defence sector. Lockheed Martin's Sikorsky helicopters. That was my headline, kept it in the family. So you got Lockheed Martin selling their equipment to Australia, and an Australian, they obviously pick up their maintenance contract for that from their parent company. And BAE Systems has got $5.3 million contract extension as well, and that's for their armoured personnel carriers fleets for the next 3 years. That's based in Adelaide. An interesting one came out today as well. Royal Australian Air Force Base Amberley's 36th Squadron has chosen the Konica Minolta MIR robots for logistics and automation and moving aircraft parts, which is interesting. And I've done a review of the MIR 400. So these are also being used in hospitals. So these are just push and drag robots from Konica Minolta, worth having a look. And from CASA today, their remote pilot for drone operators and the like are now gone for their licenses have gone digital as well, much like the driver's license in New South Wales. And it is Scam Awareness Week, and this just came out this afternoon. I thought I'd throw it in. Mimecast has uncovered a phishing attack against cybersecurity provider Checkpoint Software Tech. So I haven't looked into the background of that, but very interesting when one cybersecurity vendor comes out about an attack on another cybersecurity vendor. So it is quite interesting days. And just some recent news, just stuff that's been added to the marketplace in the last few days. Staying ahead of the technology curve now in the future is a DDLS customer survey of this month looking at cybersecurity training and awareness. Last Thursday, we ran the virtual awards for the top 20 women in cybersecurity in Singapore. Worth having a look. Those across all fields in cybersecurity in industry in Singapore. And again, what we're going to be talking about today is the Smart Cities Standards Roadmap from Standards Australia. And really, this spurred off this particular first episode. V, when this landed on my desk, I thought, perfect, that's episode 1 straight away. So I touched on the virtual awards night. The YouTube video is going very strongly, and very interesting and rewarding evening that was, and the booklet's been quite well received as well. Having a good look at, and hopefully if anyone has, any in the audience, women in cybersecurity, hopefully you'll find this inspiring to get into the industry and the sector. We are also working with IBM Security, and on the IBM Security Virtual Summit ASEAN 2020, only those from the ASEAN region are to attend this particular event, but we just dived into the cost of a data breach report 2020, looking specifically at the ASEAN insights on what data breaches are costing the region in itself. So that only goes for about 15-20 minutes, just pulling through the report apart, but worth having a look. So on that note, we're going to move to our panel session, and this is always the most challenging part, and I'm going to hand over to V, who will have the slide deck ready to go. During that time, I'm going to close off the other cameras, and V and Ian are just going to present on the Smart Cities Strategic Roadmap. I've forgotten the term already. So V, here it comes over to you now.
Thank you. So I'll just wait for you to give me that share option.
Here it's coming.
I assume I can do that. Okay. Okay, so hopefully you can see that.
Perfect.
Okay, so Ian, over to you.
Thanks very much, Vicky, and thanks very much for the introduction. I'm very much on smart cities today, and we just saw the Standards Australia release of the Smart Cities Roadmap for standards. New South Wales Government has also just released its Smart Places strategy. And of course, the work we've been doing for the New South Wales Data Analytics Centre over the last 5 years has really been about privacy preserving data sharing, of course, is fundamental for smart cities. Next slide, please. It's been a bit of a whirlwind over the last 6 months in Australia, looking at the challenges associated with COVID and trying to be a smart city, trying to react to what's happening in the world of the need to change travel restrictions, the need to put in place a whole series of increasing opt-out restrictions, and also understand the impact of those. And what you can see on the screen right at the moment, which seems to be unable to move forward.
Yeah. I'm trying to move it forward for you, Ian, but I'm having a bit of problem.
Okay.
If you click on the screen itself, on the main screen, it should work. That's it. Click.
Okay, great. Fantastic.
So what you had seen, thank you, V, what you had seen was a map of COVID data released every day by New South Wales Government. And it is part of this story of smart cities, and how you respond to a pandemic is part of being a smart city. New South Wales has recently released its Smart Places strategy, taking into consideration the fact that New South Wales has 3 major cities and a lot of urban regional centres. And it's a very citizen-centric model, putting customers or citizens at the heart and thinking about all of those human outcomes that we care about: skills, health, safety, environmental quality, collaboration, and equity, accessibility. It builds on quite a long series of strategies and policies which have been released by New South Wales Government, constantly thinking about big picture, constantly thinking about outcomes, ultimately being driven by data. And that includes strategies around dealing with customers, regional areas, and also building infrastructure and making it smart. Next slide. The model that New South Wales has been working towards within those outcomes is to build increasingly sophisticated digital twins. And the picture on the left is the view that Transport New South Wales has about connecting the concrete, the steel, the glass together and making it smart, putting in place sensors, building digital twins, using data sets from sensors, data sets from unstructured sources, and understanding the different phases of the plan, the construct, the operate, the maintain, but also thinking about that in the context of those outcomes. What are we trying to achieve in very human-centric terms? Transport's view of the world is fundamentally underpinned by the standards roadmap which connects very closely with what Standards Australia is doing. And that little snapshot on the right is the current scope that we're thinking about for standards for smart cities. And of course, it's not too hard to draw a bigger circle around those, but that's the basic focus. If you can move forward. Now, the problem we've been working on for the last 5 years is getting all of that data together to try and understand, or to build that digital twin, to understand situational awareness, to be able to prioritize, to be able to optimize, to be able to do the what if. And there's a fundamental challenge, which is also now touched on the standards world. And that question is, if you keep linking data sets together, do you eventually reach the point where you've got personally identifiable information? And this very, very simple image here talks about that fundamental belief that people have, that if you link de-identified data sets, at some point you move from having a little bit of personal information to actually be able to be personally identifiable with that data set. And that threshold is a very difficult thing to be able to determine. And a few years ago, we went to the standards community and said, tell us what the standard is for understanding the level of personal information in linked de-identified data sets. And the result was, actually, why don't you go away and create a working group to try and assess this. So on that journey, if you can move forward, over the last approximately 3 years, we've been looking at the standards that relate to cybersecurity, to SQL, to cloud computing, to information management, to artificial intelligence, all of those things which are horizontal layers that enable smart cities, and been thinking about the total life cycle of use of data, from creation, transmission, to storage, analysis, reuse, archiving, and thinking about where standards exist, where there are gaps, and that really challenging question of when do we reach the point that we've got personally identifiable information. And if you think about all of the brilliant ideas around digital twins, building information models, 5G, all the different new ways we have of generating, capturing, using, storing information about us, about preferences, about what we do, about where we go, this challenge is actually a fundamental challenge. And it's a fundamental challenge if we are going to build those digital twins and going to build those smart places. We need to address the challenge of whether we have personally identifiable information, what are the frameworks, what are the considerations. Now, there's a real world example which is worth touching on. If you could just advance. We have been slowly but surely building data sharing frameworks. If you could tap 3 more times, trying to understand the challenges around data sharing and building governance frameworks to take into consideration whether we are dealing with very people-centric, very sensitive data, the sort of data that for years we've worked on looking at domestic and family violence or children at risk of harm in that top right-hand corner. But trying to take that measure of personal information and an acknowledgement of the inherent sensitivity of data and building governance frameworks in order to enable us to build the appropriate protections in place. But a lot of the time, we're not dealing with very sensitive, very personal data. In New South Wales, we have the Opal data. There are many other economies around the world that have tap-on, tap-off public transport. And that's about the most useful data that you can use for planning infrastructure and also for creating value out of infrastructure data. So if your governance framework is actually about not very sensitive data, a train ride, but with a strong component of personal information, then you can build a different governance framework for data sharing, bottom right-hand corner. Or in fact, you can build a different governance structure where the data is sensitive about infrastructure planning, for example, but not very personal. You should use information about people's use and movement to help plan infrastructure, but your governance framework really is about protecting against sensitivities as opposed to really protecting about aggregate personal information. And the final one, please, just one more tap, is when we're thinking about releasing open data, such as the sort of data that we put out, governments put out around the world. Now, again, working with the standards community, this, what might seem to be relatively dry stuff about data sharing, is fundamental to being able to build the information models, the digital twins, the ability to plan, optimize, predict, or do whatever. And we've been building and testing these models out over the last 3 to 5 years, and then COVID hit. Maybe one more time. And all of a sudden, we took this Apologies, there's an equation on the table. I'm not sure how it got there. If you could just avert your eyes. We've been looking at building equations to help us understand that level of personal information. And again, over the last 3 to 5 years, we've been working with the Australian Computer Society and Standard Australia to build out something which we call the personal information factor, which allows us to measure just how personal or how much information is in people-centric data. If you move away from that slide, I think we're scaring people. And then COVID hit. And all of a sudden, our frameworks which rely on the existence of personal information measures and understanding of sensitivity, there was suddenly a strong desire for New South Wales government to release COVID data at postcode level, which is quite granular, and very specific detail. So in that data sharing framework, this is what we call a situational awareness data set or a use case. We're releasing very sensitive data about COVID cases down at an individual level, aggregated by postcode. And we use that measure of personal information and our understanding of the sensitivities of that data to protect the data in an appropriate way by pushing down that personal information factor, pushing ourselves into that bottom left-hand corner in order to release the data. If you could do one more. And one more. Yes, please. And whilst all of that seems like a pretty long bow, the point is, what we produce every single day is situational awareness for a smart state and for a smart city. It's the most basic use case you can have for a smart city is to understand, then predict, then what if, then optimize. The most basic use case relies on data sharing and use. And in this case, we have very sensitive data that we know has a degree of personal information, but by being able to identify the level of personal information, by being able to protect the data and push down that level of personal information through different forms of protection, what we've actually demonstrated is a way of sharing sensitive data, however, protecting levels of personal information, admittedly for a fairly simple use case of understanding what's going on the ground on a day-by-day basis. But it forms a fundamental building block to actually build back up to what we want to achieve with digital twins and the ability to create, understand, and optimize smart cities. One more slide. I can't leave this presentation without saying standards needed. Thank you very much.
Very good. And V, straight over to you, I understand.
Yes, I'm just going to see if I can bring up my slides as well.
Perfect.
Oops. Great, so hopefully you can see that. So thank you so much, Chris, and for giving us the opportunity to talk about our Smart City Standards Roadmap. So before I actually dive into the roadmap, I wanted just to give you a bit of background in terms of, why or how it was developed. So last year in May 2019, we formed the Smart City Standards Reference Group. I'm just going to... Yeah, so we formed the Smart City Standards Reference Group with 45 members represented, including all levels of government. That's local, state and federal. And that was chaired by Dr. Ian Opperman. And really it was trying to work out how do we coordinate our approach when it comes to smart city standards to support cities and the community build their smart city visions. And the two key drivers behind our roadmap was that, the two key drivers behind our roadmap was from an Australian government point of view, we had the Building Up and Moving Out report. And in that recommendation, it spoke about Standards Australia developing a roadmap for the community so they can actually generate the benefits of a connected city. The second driver The second driver was around our international smart city standards that's being developed globally through various international communities. So of those, there were three key areas that was working on smart city standards. One was around the ISO, so they were looking at smart cities infrastructure for the community, and they were looking at the governance framework for smart cities. We have the JTC1, which is the Joint Technical Committee, and they were looking more from an ICT perspective. And there's also the IEC, which is the International Electrotechnical Commission, looking from more the electrotechnology aspects of smart city. So in response to those two key drivers, we found that we needed to work out, how to actually consolidate all that. And from the reference group perspective, building the roadmap was almost like building a car. In terms of, there was many standards out there related to smart city, but it was also very complicated trying to work out how do they complement each other. And so from the smart city standards reference group's point of view, the first thing that they did was that to take a step back and look at from a perspective of our, my apologies, I'm trying to navigate through the slides there while I'm speaking. So yeah, over a course of 8 meetings, the reference group met and debated. And one of the key things that they all agreed on was that to develop a standards around smart city, we wanted to build on 5 key goals. The first one was about supporting existing smart cities framework and policies. And as Ian mentioned, the New South Wales government recently released their smart places strategy. So we want to make sure that the standards that we develop actually complement rather conflict. The second one was to improve the knowledge sharing between people who work in the smart city space. So we found that there was a lot of people working in individual or in silos, and the purpose of our standards is really to try and consolidate and bring those expertise together for Australia. The third one was obviously in terms of standards. We found that Australia hasn't really been at the table in some of these international discussions. And so we want to make sure that the goal of our standards and the way we develop them is an opportunity to bring those conversations to the table for Australia. The fourth one, and Ian has mentioned in quite detail, is around improving data accessibility and interoperability to make sure that we have data from different systems and devices. There's a way that we can actually connect those data points. And then the fifth goal was around supporting our community. So we found that throughout Australia and at different local government levels, there were varying levels of maturity in terms of being able to create those smart city visions and implementing those smart cities initiatives. So from those goals, the reference group then created those 11 recommendations that you see today. And of those 11 recommendations, 8 of them relate to getting our technical experts back at the table and contributing to these smart cities committees. So of those 8, it relates to creating and reestablishing our engagement. For example, we recently joined the Data Management Committee internationally to have our work on data sharing further developed. The other one was making sure that we increase our involvement in digital twin standards, and also 5G, establishing a 5G for smart cities. The other 3 remaining recommendations relate more to initiatives on how we can support the community develop and uptake those standards. Those 3 initiatives centered around the assurance framework, which is about creating a map of standards that will help people when they're looking at implementing smart cities initiatives that they can refer to. The second one relates to standards for open, structured and unstructured data. And again, that ties in with our goals around data interoperability. And the third initiative was around adopting international standards that's currently available to support cities and communities develop their smart cities visions and strategies. So if I can leave with some key messages for your audience, is that for one, the Smart Cities Roadmap is really to help our industry and community understand and have a clear way forward. Number 2, we want to make sure that we're broadly engaging with everyone on the Smart Cities agenda and making sure that we increase that collaboration. Number 3 is giving everyone an outline of the priorities in the work program so that we're clear about Australia's journey on smart cities. And then lastly, the roadmap's really to help us make sure we implement those recommendations as soon as possible. Thank you, Chris.
Great, well done. There's a lot there to unpack. Again, that's my interest in this particular domain, because it's much like what we try to cover off in the series, it touches every aspect of technology and people. In fact, Ian's one of the first slides was the strategic, process and technical aspects of what that work involves. So look, thank you very much. I think without further ado, we'll dive in to see what is happening on the Indian side. I think we'll touch on some of these aspects as well. And before I go, V, I take it there will be some Indian representation on some of the work on some of these committees. Have you seen that before I introduce our Indian guests?
Yeah, I believe so. In terms of the Indian counterpart, we haven't really seen those conversations internationally. But I do know when we were over there last year, in terms of our work in technical committees, India did indicate that they want to actually, develop their smart cities strategy. And I believe there was about 90 cities. That was the goal for India. But more within our own Australian committees is pretty much more an Australian conversation. But yeah, internationally, I know when we speak to our Indian counterpart, they have indicated that is also their goal, to move to those smart cities vision and strategies.
Great. Well, there we go. We've got Chinmay on screen. Sangeeta, if you could come on. But look, thank you so much for that, V and Ian. I'm just going to take your cameras off if you can. Here we go. There you are. So, Ian, there you are.
Okay.
Sangeeta, Chinmay, I'll let you do the introductions, and Sangeeta, you just say next slide, and then I'll slot it over. No problems.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chris and ADI Association, for giving us an opportunity to present, and sincere thanks to all our viewers here for sparing a valuable time. Can you all hear me?
Yes, no problems. Go.
Okay. So, slide, yeah. So, trust you all are doing good. And before we present, I'll take this opportunity to introduce ourselves. So, we at ASTRIKOS Consulting, a young Indian entity, are supporting Make in India initiative. We are a team of young technology experts providing consulting for smart cities, smart industries, data center solutions, smart healthcare, and smart analytics. We are the winner of India 500 Startup Award for 2019. We have our expertise in providing automation solution for Industry 5.0, Industrial IoT, provide cognitive intelligence and data science product lines. Next slide, please.
Very good. Sorry, hang on.
On our footprints, I would like to share. On our footprints, I would like to share that we are one of the early movers where we have worked in the smart city development projects closely with Bharat Electronic Limited in the complete development of the Unified Command and Control Center. The project is up and live. We have also good experience of working in Namchi, Gangtok for Sikkim and other smart cities. Also, I'm pleased to share that we are proud partner of Aviva Group, which has more than 5 decades of experience in industrial software, smart cities, and they are the industrial automation leaders in market today. Next slide, please.
And my apologies, Chinmay, I had you on mute, so that was my fault. Thanks for the message.
All right, that's all.
Next slide, please. Yeah. In today's agenda, we'll be touching upon global smart city framework, its key performance indicators, and the standards for smart city. Also, to assist the healthcare department in pandemic, we'll be presenting our crisis control response and mitigation system. From here, I would like to hand over to Dr. Chinmay Hegde, who is our CEO for ASTRIKOS Consulting. Over to you.
So, first of all, good afternoon to all the people from Australian side, and hello world, and good morning India. Well, so Indian smart cities, of course, have been taking place in implementation since last 4 years, since the time Honorable Prime Minister Modi has announced in his one of the Independence Day speech. So since then it has moved quite in a fast pace. However, there are a lot of things that need to be implemented, as all of us know, because India is more of retrofit than a fresh implementation, because none of us can imagine blocking a couple of hours traffic in any of the key cities in India, right? So the building infrastructure in India is quite a challenging task, but we are doing decently. So, well, to start with, in fact, I would want to just give a quick intro on what are the global standards that for measuring the KPIs, and quite important to measure the KPIs in smart cities as the smart city infrastructure is implemented, and information communication technology, ICT, is complementing the implementation of the infrastructure. So there are few standards, as many of you know. Still, I want to reiterate, as per the CCD certification levels, there are, according to ISO 37120 and ISO 37122, there are KPIs for the administration as well as KPIs for the quality of life in a city. However, there is one more important aspect that had been missed in many cases. That is why we are facing the response challenges of the recent pandemic. That is emergency management and guidelines for incident management and response mechanism. Right. So can we move on to the next slide? Next slide. Well, so just a few slides. I just want to run through this and the next slide, where the global smart city frameworks always talk about implementing the standards as well as putting back into the action, right? It's more of a feedback mechanism, where there are certain global standards such as NIST frameworks of USA and European smart city model, and Spain's smart city model, which is considered as quite mature, and also some of the models like the way just the previous presenter had presented, that standards Australia, right? So that's another one. And like that, India wants to move into the standardization, which is still to be done. The initiatives have started just recently, and things will move on. And can we move on to the next slide? Well, so KPIs are quite important, and India had done a particular had taken a particular initiative and done a particular effort in terms of measurement of the performance using certain metrics, which arrive to a particular corporate style of balanced scorecard approach, where Indian missions such as smart city missions under Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, as well as Niti Aayog, have done a certain research and put forward certain guidelines, where the implementers, especially the ICT implementers, have to follow that, so that the administrators can understand whether the investments that have been made are really worth, or where are they standing in terms of maturity of the models of the smart city implementation, right? Please move on. Next slide. Yeah, India's mission, I want to just deep dive more into this, is, well, smart city guidelines as listed on the screen is, MoHUA has put certain guidelines, what should be part of smart city, and how smart city has to be implemented, ICT enablement in smart cities, and citizen data privacy and cyber security. You must have recently come across some of the apps have been banned because of the cyber security law violation. However, Indian Supreme Court had passed a landmark judgment in the year of 2016 about citizens' data privacy, and without the permission of the citizens, the data cannot be just simply used, right? So even certain government agencies had to face the brunt of that, in fact, but it's a good thing for, in the interest of the citizens of a democratic country, to safeguard their privacy. And apart from that, there are certain standards, like into the case of data privacy of hosting in the cloud, all the smart cities are following at this moment MITI for guidelines, that is a Ministry of IT and Electronics guidelines, to host the data or host the applications of the respective cities on the cloud, which is an initiative called Government of India Cloud, where the private partners are empaneled upon a respective audit, and then they are allowed to sell their respective cloud service to the smart cities. Next slide. Yeah. So India's guidelines suggest that smart city livability index, that's the core of all the standards of a smart cities KPIs, where there is a weighted KPIs which are defined according to the categories. There are main pillars such as institutional pillar, social pillar, economic pillar, and physical pillar. So where the physical pillar is all about cities infrastructure, right? So the infrastructure has been given the highest weightage, that is about 45% weightage. Why? Because of Indian cities have a lot of improvement to be done in terms of the basic infrastructure such as power, water, sanitation, and safety, security, etc. So that is the reason the 45% of the weightage has been given for the basic physical infrastructure. And then comes the social and institutional infrastructure. However, there is, you might have seen, a part of that would be a healthcare. Next slide, please. Yeah. So health was one of the core parameters as part of this framework that was defined by the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs Smart City Mission. But the lesson learned is mainly 1% of the investment was, total. Each smart city had about $1 billion fund. However, only 1% was actually being allocated for the healthcare infrastructure. So the lesson learned is the recent COVID-19 situation, which had, shaken the whole world. And now the administrators are understanding, and recent tenders have shown mainly the respective effect of that is, okay, we have learned a lesson and let us improve our healthcare infrastructure in terms of especially healthcare administration, because urban development can do the healthcare administration and give the input to the healthcare department so that healthcare department can take necessary actions in terms of healthcare services and infrastructure. Next slide. The measurement of performance outline is all about citizens' perception as well as the respective administrative KPIs. The combination where this particular weightage between the right-hand side and the left-hand side is right-hand side of the screen carries 70% weightage, and the left-hand side of the screen, that is citizen perception, carries 30% of the weightage on the respective implementation as per the guidelines. And how do we do this is in the next slide, where there is a respective scorecard, balanced scorecard approach, which is there, like the way how corporates do that, the balanced scorecard approach. Similarly, when it comes to the urban infrastructure or the smart city infrastructure, the perspectives add up there. The perspectives are mainly of four types. That is, one is citizen perspective, internal process perspective, learning and growth perspective, and financial perspective. So there are certain sub parameters or KPIs related to that, which are being measured. Mainly respective facilitation helps the city administrators to measure the KPIs. Move on to the next slide.
And I'm just conscious of time, Chinmay, if we can. If we could make this the last one, if there is any extra slides, we can share it with our audience. But yeah, we're just going to hand over to Codee very shortly. So if you could just wrap this up in terms of, because I can see we're definitely touching on the same fields here.
Yeah, sure. What do you suggest me to do? Shall I take it and finish it off?
Yes, if you've got any other final points that you wanted to make off before a panel discussion.
Yeah,
Chinmay,
I'm
you
just taking
could,
forward to
you
how
could share
ASTRIKOS
what is
Sorry, Raman. Just
what is COVID?
So Chinmay, you can speak on crisis control and response mitigation system.
correct.
Just two
So
slides. Right?
yeah, we have provided a particular platform to recently platform to the urban administration recently, right? So just move on to the
slide 20. Slide 20, Chris.
Yeah.
21. Then.
So
okay, 3 more. Hang on.
each city has a command and control center, and the command and control center has been used recently as a war room for the COVID-19 situation response. So where we provide them certain analytics and action-orientedness, where the administrators, because it's all about the line departments, various different departments in the city come together, where this is the particular platform what you are seeing on the screen right now.
So just to add to what Chinmay is saying, sorry Chinmay, so what we aim here is we aim to provide a SaaS platform as well as which is available both on cloud and on premises. Also, we would like to share here that we are partnered with Aviva Group, the world leading automation solution integrated with their command and control platform. And we have proved our capability in some of the smart cities where, we have deployed the complete platform. Just to share, we have done this for Belgavi Smart City and Aligarh Smart City. C2RMS platform is already deployed here. So it's a department, it's a platform which assists the health department in providing information on a real-time basis so that they take an effective decision-making and containing the spread of the coronavirus. So we would like to say that this platform facilitates integration of critical functions like the help desk, the citizen service app, the social media, the e-governance, and thus provides an operational excellence.
Wonderful. So it's a command and control dashboard, right? So bringing in that feed and display. Very good.
Yeah, and we are quite thankful to ADCAI for endorsing the platform. Right? So thanks to that, and thanks to Mr. Raman Sipori for helping us in terms of spreading the word.
No problem. I'm just conscious of time. We always end up going over time anyway. Codee, you are there. Codee, you're going to touch on pretty much the same in terms of public protection. If you are ready, I'm going to hand over to you and you can share your screen. Here it comes.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ram.
Thank you, Sangeeta. Thank you, Dr. Hegde. Stay on the line and beautiful.
Is that sharing, Chris?
You are sharing your slide. Yes, just 1 second. I'm going to bring you back. That's it, Codee. Go for it.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So conscious of time, I just want to spend a few minutes today talking to you. We've had some good presentations on the macro of smart cities, and I want to try and bring it into the micro a bit and talk about crowded places protection and providing physical security and emergency response to crowded places and protecting them from crime and terrorism. So to give you a little bit of background, I'm the principal security consultant at TACTIX, and my project experience in Australia has primarily been around helping state government agencies and private developers secure national critical infrastructure and transport projects in Australia. And that experience has included what we call crowded places protection for city precincts, multi-mode transport hubs and the like. And what I want to touch on in this presentation is really what the smart places strategy means for security and where, from an aspirational perspective, we might end up in terms of crowded places design and crowded places operation. So the smart places strategy covered off quite well, I think, by Dr. Ian Opperman earlier. But it talks about a technology and data-driven solutions to improving quality of life in New South Wales. And as mentioned, one of the key objectives is safety and security, which is great to see it as one of the core 6. And it proposes to improve safety and security for New South Wales and for people in New South Wales by reducing crime through a number of methods, including having more ready access to smart technologies like CCTV analytics, sharing those information feeds with neighbours in particular precincts, for example, and also having better access to data to improve planning. But it also talks about social resilience, and that really is about helping our communities be able to feel safe in their environment, to know that they can report incidents of crime, for example, and to really bounce back when things hit us unexpectedly, like COVID, for example. The Smart Places in the strategy is really about built and natural environment areas that use data to improve livability and resilience, and primarily focus on creating solutions for urbanisation and sustainability challenges. And security, when we're talking about crime prevention and terrorism, is really an urbanisation problem. When you have a lot of people in a small place or a city, for example, obviously there's always some bad actors that we're trying to deter or reduce their capability to cause harm to people. And Smart Places really give us a lot of new and interesting ways of achieving good security outcomes. When we're talking about crowded places protection specifically, what does Smart Places mean in that context? Well, because Smart Places are really about increasing our sense of security according to the strategy, when we apply that to places with large numbers of people, gathering at predictable times, in areas that generally have a social, religious, or economic significance to the state, territory, or the country, we can start doing some interesting things. So by marrying these, smart solutions and having these Internet of Things and industrial Internet of Things, sensor nets, tying them into security objectives and KPIs, we can start really measuring the success of security intervention. So some of the key impacts and where I think aspirationally we can end up with a true smart city is looking at improving planning tools for security planners, including things like running simulations based on real-life data collected during previous criminal incidents, for example. And by running simulations on digital twins, for example, for buildings, we can actually see what security interventions might actually save lives and reduce the impact of events as they occur. The other thing we can do when we have access to things like crime data or various other bits of information that the state government might collect, we can look at historic trends and be a bit more specific about what type of threats we can expect and what sort of data surrounds pre, during, and post-incident security incidents. This allows us to be more proportionate in the way that we plan for security incidents and allows us to have trigger points for security operations teams to actually respond to events as they're happening. The other thing that's really important and often kind of gets lost in the security conversation is the ability for security planners to plan for the user, because crowded spaces are really about our community and allowing our community to actually use our public spaces in a safe and secure way without the security actually interfering with their ability to use that space. And nobody wants to ring every single building in Sydney, for example, with bollards. We don't want big ugly sensors everywhere, but we do want to provide a proportionate level of protection that supports the legitimate use case. And having more information about who's using our spaces and when and why allows us to be much more particular about what type of security interventions we might introduce. And from the resilience side, being able to more quickly detect threats, respond to them quicker, and then understand the impact of those incidents allows us to recover quicker as well. So these four elements really are kind of focused in the smart cities environment. Importantly as well, I think having more information and more data as part of the Smart Places strategy is great because it kind of aligns to all the different components of a security design process. So normally when we're designing for a crowded place, we're looking at the context of that place. How does it operate? Where does it sit within the state? What's important from a strategic perspective and where would we like it to operate? And then when we look at the threat, we're looking at, okay, well, based on that context, what type of people or groups have the intent and capability to cause harm, and are these credible threats to that location? From there, we can look at the vulnerability of the location, the specific way that the site is laid out or designed. Does that introduce any particular blind spots, for example? Or is it in an area where there might be significant run-up for vehicle attacks, for example? We can look at the criticality of the different assets in that site and whether those assets have flow-on consequences to other parts of the state. For example, if there was an attack or an incident at a train station, does that impact the whole line or is it localized? And from there, we can start prioritizing the risks and what we need to design for. We know what's credible based on all that information. We can then define the engineering requirements and implement them accordingly. Smart Places and having more data allows us to define the context in a much more granular level of detail. It allows us to understand the threats better, as I mentioned earlier. We can run simulations to test our understanding of the vulnerabilities and criticalities. And importantly, if we're progressed enough in our thinking and in the way that all these sensors tie in, we can actually have a dynamic risk assessment process that updates almost live, depending on the information our sensors are bringing into the site. And that allows us to be very flexible in the way we design our spaces. From an operations perspective, there's a few things that are really important. We want to be able to deter crime and terrorism. We want to be able to detect it when it happens, and we want to reduce the effectiveness of the event when it does occur. From there, we want to respond as quickly as possible and maximize the bounce back or the recovery. And some brief examples of that from a smart places or a more connected place perspective would be: you arrive on site, you get a text message saying, welcome, here are some of the key facts about the site and some key features, but also here's the number to the security control room, and we do have a sophisticated duress network, for example. And that might be enough to deter a criminal actor because they feel like I've been noticed and that there are people actually watching what's happening in this space. From there, if they did decide to, commit a crime, an advanced precinct-wide CCTV analytics system might pick that up earlier and allow us to share that information with our neighbours and say, look, there's an incident about to occur. You might want to be aware of this type of person or individual that we've spotted. From there, we can actually, respond dynamically to that event. If it was an active shooter, for example, we could track that person through the site and dynamically lock down elements of the site to keep them restricted and reduce their ability to seek new targets. So there's a number of things that we can do with technology, and particularly as we roll out more sophisticated technology to our sites and tie them into these broader data sets that we've been talking about today, the ability to be dynamic in the way we approach security in our public spaces is greatly improved. So very briefly, I just want to end on this, which is kind of how we break down crowded places when we're doing a security planning exercise. So we look at the user groups in a space, who's going to be using it, where are they coming from, what type of demographics are they, etc. And from there, we can start breaking down how they might perceive a space and how they might perceive security intervention. We can look at the activities that we're expecting to see in that space and what's next to the space. So who are our neighbours? Are they bars and nightclubs, for example, that are open late, or are they libraries and community centres that are only open during the day? And once we understand these things, we can start planning the security infrastructure and all the other bits and pieces that go into our public places. What's really interesting about smart places and having more sophisticated technology embedded into the environment is we can actually connect and make all these different elements interactive. And by that, I mean, we can start to understand who is coming to site and when. We can get real-time feedback from those users about how they're experiencing the space and what they'd like to see changed. And from there, we can be dynamic in how we plan for activities and then secure those activities. So our security deployments can be flexible based on the real use case at the time, and we can be more sophisticated in our long-term planning. That's really just a quick summary. I'll leave it there, conscious of time, but thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat or reach out to me on my email there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Codee. Perfect. And again, conscious of time, but as long as the panel is available to stay on for a discussion, if any of the panelists do need to leave, because again, we allocate an hour. I'm learning pretty quick, Raman, that an hour is just never going to be enough for these discussions. But if you're happy to stay on, please do, because there's a number of questions from the audience. Let me just onboard you all if we can. Ian, you're very welcome to stay. V down the bottom. Codee, I just noticed, since you were the last presenter, I noticed you didn't mention SEPTED. I review SEPTED now into the sort of the third generation in a data context. Do you think SEPTED is losing relevance given the complexity of cities, or do you think it's becoming more relevant?
No, it's definitely becoming more relevant, in my opinion, Chris. It's often I'm talking about crowded places protection, and the conversation is always about how can we harden the site more and more, when in reality that really detracts from the purpose of the space. As I kind of touched on, we want to encourage users to actually enjoy our cities, and overly securitizing them with excess bollards and sensors and cameras and things don't always support that. And that's where SEPTED steps in, because it's that much more passive approach about planning for the community, understanding the needs of the user groups and supporting legitimate use cases. So I think that that's a good point, and CPTED does play a critical role in how we protect our cities from crime and terrorism.
Yeah, I think, again, I come in from a practitioner's viewpoint, and maybe back to Ian, as a data scientist, do you think there's a challenge, because it's so multidisciplinary, there's so many disciplines involved in a smart city, how do you manage the two? Because if you look at it just from the data, and maybe that's the question of, how should we think about a smart city? Is it just purely from data? Because when you start to actually apply it as a practitioner, it becomes very complex, and I get concerned complexity creates vulnerability. So your perspective in terms of the cross domains and disciplines involved here. Sorry, hang on. That was me. My fault. Go.
No worries at all. So always start with the outcome in mind. And the great thing about New South Wales is we have the Human Services Outcomes Framework, which are those human-centric aspects. But also in the world of smart cities, we have outcomes frameworks which talk about a range of livability, accessibilities. So that actually helps to grab the complexity and give you a handle to deal with it. And then you can drill down into what you need to measure, what you need to understand, what you need to change, what you need to optimize. So there is great value in doing the bottom up, deep technical, but if you don't start with the top down, you disappear into complexity very quickly.
I think there's a question from the audience, I think for Sangeeta and for Chinmay, in terms of what were the key points being monitored? You had your command and control. Is it a matter of that command and control, like any other dashboard, can then start to select the feeds of data that it has, and then it puts it into a measurable context?
So
Yes.
interesting. Sorry, is that the question for me or
I
not?
beg your pardon, no, for Chinmay and Sangeeta, just on their platform, there's a question.
Yeah, as of now, it has been, okay, in the Indian context, I believe that question is, and in the Indian context, so far it has been only just about monitor and manage, but the importance of building the context as well as building the respective analytics, like a correlative analytics or collaborative analytics, right? So these are quite important from the command control center perspective. Else, there is no meaning of KPI, right? So KPIs have to be, monitored for the current progress as well as the historical and future trends which are potential.
Okay, and V, did you get some comfort from Chinmay and Sangeeta's presentation mentioning ISOs and standards? Any alignment there from what you've been doing?
Yes, no, it was really encouraging to see those standards being quoted. And as I said, for Australia, when we looked at those standards, collectively, the reference group agreed that they were applicable to Australia. One of the things that came up quite clear was the ISO 37106, which is more like the operational framework for a city to implement their smart city, strategy. So I know that that's something that in the industry they said, start with that first if you don't know where to start. And then obviously those indicators that Chinmay mentioned, yes, we saw the value in having that. So to help councils and local areas, start to understand where they are in that maturity of smart cities and their performance.
Okay, and one other question, because we've got, technically there's 4 consultants here, or 5, I'll count Rahman as well. How much opportunity, with all of these standards, and my work with state government and local government, they don't often have the skill set or that strategic approach. They're very silo orientated, whereas this needs a big sort of umbrella view. Ian, I know from your background you've had some real, you've been in this space for a while now. Where do you think the skill gap is, or the key opportunities for, say, our consultants and those that want to get into this space? Where are the opportunities and where are some of the gaps?
Unfortunately, the opportunities are many. Again, helping people understand where they are, where they sit in terms of their maturity journey, and what the next steps are they need to take. That are really very important. What tended to happen is that people want to go on this journey, have no idea where to start, no idea what the next step is, or in fact, even what good looks like. So there's opportunities at every one of those, helping people conceptualise, frame, plan, and understand what they need to do to take the next steps. It would be very obvious places for consultants.
So that's often policy and strategy work. Then you need the planning and design aspects as well, and getting everyone to talk together. Chinmay and Sangeeta, in terms of India and the work that you've been doing across 6 cities, how do you find that challenge locally there in terms of government and engaging with government? Because you've got local and state governments. In fact, you've got more state governments than we do.
Yeah, I would want to answer this question, Sangeeta. So in case of India, the best thing they have done, the government has done, is forming the SPVs, special purpose vehicles, which are like a quasi public sector undertaking, right? So the decision making happens faster in terms of smart cities. Smart city, wherever we are working, 6 of them, right? So each of them are like a limited companies. They follow the structure of CEO, CFO, COO, and the director, general manager, technology, kind of all these kind of designations, right? So that makes the decision making process quite fast. We don't need to wait for some kind of a political interventions or bureaucratical overhead. That overhead has been reduced in terms of smart city execution. So that's the reason you would see around 50 smart cities projects have started in the last 3 years, or more than 50, I suppose.
75.
75, and I think
75.
the policy was for 90 from memory. It's a competitive process as well, though, isn't it, between the cities?
Absolutely, yes. It is there is a challenge, smart city challenge that Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs carries out. These are all fast track selection of cities, qualifying the cities for becoming eligible to apply for the fund of smart city under the smart city mission. So cities have been responding quite well, and they have been forming citizen and administrative combined bodies, and they are putting the plans forth. However, yes, still it is having a lot of scope for improvement in terms of operational excellence, right? So that takes some time.
Yep. Here in Australia,
And with the focus,
sorry, go
yes,
Sangeeta.
just I'll add one more minute. Yeah. So and with the focus of with the recent pandemic that's happened, the focus is more gone on the healthcare segment, as well as how do you smartly integrate the complete stakeholders of the healthcare along with the entire other city functions. So there are 2 industries which are today gaining traction. One is education, because education has not stopped, and healthcare, yes, definitely, because we are working, all the city officials are working, to provide better diagnostic services, improve the healthcare facility for the COVID patient, at the same time developing vaccine. So here is where, there are organizations like us who are working to provide them with an operational integrated platform where, they can monitor and take an informed decision on the various functions of the city operations.
Thank you. Raman, I understand you do have to leave, and Codee had to drop out too, so it's had to beat some traffic apparently here, even in Sydney. Some closing remarks, Raman, from you?
Yeah, thank you all the panelists. I have got 2-3 closing remarks. Number 1, I appreciate the presentation from the Australian side. In fact, I went through the mathematical modeling of entropy in my early student days. I would like to know more details about this from Mr. Ian Opperman. And then the standards by Lee were very informative. And then, of course, the safety and other information from Codee was just left the panel. From the Indian side, you saw the practical aspect of it. But what we have done today is just the kindergarten class of the smart city class. We need to do some joint working group to understand each other's, experience. So what I propose to do is that Australia-India group, if you all agree, would like to exchange some more information from the Australian side standards, the Indian side, the practical information. And can we think of working on a maturity model for the smart cities? This is just a food for thought. We do have so many standards in India, Australia, Europe, and USA. What we need to do is that end of the day, it's a software standard. So I can share my thoughts on this. we go for a capability maturity model. And then second question is, when we say 100 or 200 smart cities in the world, which is the smartest of the smart cities? How smart is the smart city? So can we have smart 1.0, 2.0? Australian side would like to do that. Well, everybody says I'm compiling to the standard, but who is more smarter than the other? The other point was the best practices we'd like to know from the Australian side and from rest of things also. And on the safety of the smart cities, today we are talking of a world which is so uncertain and unsecure. What in case tomorrow in a city, India, we had this, suddenly a rogue drone comes into the play. I haven't seen any presenter talking of how to stop the rogue drone. So with that, Chris, I think there's a need from the marketplace to have a session on separately the anti-drone technologies, which can be dovetailed into the smart cities.
Yep.
Thank you, panelists, and we'd like to continue the discussion to understand and have a joint AI working group. A stands for Australia, I for India. It also stands for Artificial Intelligence Group. Thank you.
Thank you, Raman. Do appreciate it. Ian, I think I might leave one last question, and we're getting questions fired in as well. I think just to close it off for time, and no doubt we'll cover this topic again. You must have searched the world, and V may be able to answer this question too. Where is the leading kind of city? Where would you point to in terms of benchmarking right now? And I know there's probably only going to be one answer. You don't say Sydney. If it's not Sydney, what's the other one that you might want to do?
Well, there are lots of places around the world that have smart infrastructure and have smart roads and smart buildings. But honestly, in terms of smart services, where the citizen is put at the heart of it, I think New South Wales in general is really a genuine contender. We certainly have seen some really amazing stuff come out of Finland and Estonia with a customer-centric approach. But Australia has a very different balance of privacy and relation with government. So I'm going to say that New South Wales is pretty smart.
Very good. It's hard not to argue. It'd be interesting, Chinmay, Sangeeta, maybe what would be your leading city in India in this space as well? And given that one's in Bangalore, one's in Delhi, there's a bit of a competition there already.
I'd like to answer this. Yeah. So one of the cities which is very well developed in terms of addressing all the parameters of a smart city is the Atal Nagar, which is erstwhile called as Naya Raipur Smart City. This was well inaugurated by our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji. Also, it was been applauded by Niti Aayog Chairman Shri Amitabh Kant ji, as well as also it set an example in the Ministry of Urban Affairs, where this project is getting emulated. So we have another project which is emulating on similar lines is Pimpri Chinchwad Municipal Corporation.
Yep. Okay. Well, look, on that note, I think I've often seen it just in a campus approach. It's a little bit easier when you're dealing with a defined space, whereas cities are quite diverse spaces, so it's hard to know where the boundary is, and even on that context. So look, thank you so much. That was a fascinating discussion. We've gone a little bit over time, but the concept here is always to keep people wanting a little bit more as well. So thank you very much. So look, on that note, I'm going to thank Dr. Ian Opperman, New South Wales Government's Chief Data Scientist. Thank you once again, Ian. You keep coming back, mate, so thank you. I'm going to keep inviting you into the future. V. Lee, Stakeholder Engagement Manager for Standards Australia. Thank you very much for joining us. Codee Ludbey, I'll say good day to you later, but thank you very much for that time. And Sangeeta Garg, consultant from ASTRIKOS, and Dr. Chinmay Hegde, ASTRIKOS, yeah? ASTRIKOS. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Is it a Greek god?
ASTRIKOS.
Okay.
ASTRIKOS.
Thank you. It's late on a Tuesday for me, so there you go. Look, on that note, thank you so much to our panel. I'm going to just close off. This series will continue next week on cybersecurity. We touch on 4 key domains: aerospace and space, defence and national security, critical technology, and cities and infrastructure. And today, obviously, we talked about the 4th domain. So on that note, this will be available on our YouTube channel on My Security TV. Thank you once again for joining us, and we'll see you next week, next Tuesday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.